So space reliably degrades muscle density, especially in areas of your body you just don't use in space, like your hips don't really come up in space. You can lose, in one paper, they found 1.5% density loss per month. Insane. You can get renal stones because you're so much calcium is coming out of your system. Like this is what your body does. When you don't use stuff, it goes away. It's very similar to people who are stuck in bed for a long period of time. And that is with a huge amount of exercise, strength training, that sort of stuff. Similar effects happen to muscles. People lose a lot of strength. There's a story that Jerry Lininger was an astronaut who went aboard Mir, the big Soviet space station, later a Russian space station. He was very proud that after, I think, something like 4.5 months aboard, he was able to walk when he came out, just walk. By himself, right? And so most people don't. The Soviet tradition was actually that people would be carried out, like the bride over the vestibule, out of the capsule. And so space degrades muscles, degrades bones. There's more subtle effects. When you go to space, there's a fluid shift upward, right? So your body's plumbing is used to fighting gravity. When you go up into space, fluid just shifts up. People get what's called puffy face. If you see astronauts shortly after they've gone to space, they often kind of look baby-faced. And it's because this fluid is shifted up. And they often have to urinate a lot because of that, because it throws off what their body thinks is going on with their fluids. And so typically when astronauts are about to land, they drink something like consomme or like thick Gatorade to restore this fluid balance. That fluid shift, we think, also degrades vision. So astronauts, especially if they're like my age or older, like in their 40s, they send them up with what is the acronym is SAG, S-A-G. It's something like space adjustment goggles or something. But basically, reliably, your vision gets worse. And we think that's because something with the fluid shift is like changing how the nerves to your eyes get fed or something. But it's a little ominous because there is equivocal evidence possibly of cognitive effects. And so it could be that vision effect is just more obvious than cognitive effects. We don't know, but it's a little creepy. And then, of course, there's radiation. The basic deal on radiation is we don't understand well what it does, but the assumption is that it's bad, and in particular, that it's bad for an increased cancer risk. But the connection is very poorly understood because it's very hard to study radiation in humans. And even if you have data on radiation on humans, it doesn't necessarily apply in space because it's a different type of radiation.
Now, the book is about space settlement, not space travel per se. We could almost certainly put a human being on Mars sooner than later if we worked at it. Yeah. But the question is, could Mars be an escape hatch or alternative place for human beings if either a nuclear war of unimaginable size happened here, climate change got to the point where it was no longer friendly to human life, and could we survive by going to say Mars? You earlier mentioned we'd need 100,000 people. Part of the reason is that you want to reduce inbreeding, and you want to reduce. You want to be able to have subsequent generations. And in my mind, okay, maybe you send among your astronauts who head to Mars. There'd be a mix of men and women. They would procreate either before, during, or after, and your population would start to grow. And it's forgetting the 100,000 sort of minimum, if that actually is accurate. And you actually think it's larger. Mm-hmm. What's the challenge of pregnancy and growing up outside the friendly Earth that we grew up on?
Yeah, so the short version is we know almost nothing. And what we do know is scary. And so the deal is, so one thing we talk about, which I don't think we're going to get into here, but is that human spacefaring is expensive. It is usually done for political reasons. Nations do it to kind of demonstrate prestige. The scientific rewards are kind of questionable. And so the result of that is there's not like a systemic program aboard these space stations to learn how animal reproduction works, right? So you can imagine a world where NASA was like the Space Settlement Agency, and someone would say, we need a space station just to steady reproduction. That has not happened. It's very grab baggy. So when we tried to collect every experiment involving gametes or reproduction or anything even vaguely related to reproduction, it's just a bunch of random stuff. It's like one group in the 80s sent up quail eggs, and a group in the 90s sent up a rat to see how it felt and measured some hormones. And so it's extremely unsystematic. And so the results of that is you basically can't conclude anything for sure. And just to be clear, no one has ever tried to conceive in space that we know of. And certainly if they did, there's no science done on it. So that's the level of not knowing we have. Then why it's scary? Well, of course, there's the radiation. As I said, microgravity reliably reduces bone density.
Microgravity being whatever level of gravity there is, say, on the trip.
Yeah, I'm
right?
sorry. Yeah, effectively no gravity. The term is microgravity, but you can just say zero gravity, right? So yeah, on the trip, there'd be zero gravity. In the International Space Station, there's zero gravity. Logically, we're going to be on the moon or Mars, so there'll be some gravity. We have no idea what the long-term effect on bones. So there's some world in which 40% gravity on Mars is enough to fix everything, or maybe 40% gravity and you wear like a weighted vest or something. Maybe it'll be fine, right? I do like to point, so we're worried. It's worth noting that like in the 50s, it was an open question whether humans could eat, in space. There was a concern that you might like, frankly, I still find it surprising people can eat with no gravity. And so it's possible that bone density stuff on the moon or Mars will be fine. But, you try to imagine having an infant without the normal pull of gravity. It's just zany. And the other thing is, usually when we talk about this question, usually people will say something like, can you have babies in space? There's an anthropologist named Cameron Smith who wrote a book called Space Anthropology. And we don't agree with everything he says, but he made a really good point, which is it won't do to just talk about babies because the babies have to grow up to have babies. So if you successfully have a kid, which I'm willing to buy you could do in space with all the constraints, they have to develop normally, right? So you imagine like their gametes exposed to radiation and whatever mysterious effects of microgravity there are beyond that 1 1/3 year threshold that we don't know about, or whatever else. You try to imagine that telescoping generations, like it's there's no way to know. And the important thing to us is it's not just that we don't know, it's like it's obviously unethical to just send 1,000 humans and assume they're going to reproduce on Mars. It's basically, I am enough of a libertarian to think if a human adult signs a waiver, they can throw their life away however they like. But if they're going to introduce children into it who did not volunteer to grow up in this incredibly hostile, dangerous environment, that seems to me pretty clearly like experimenting on children for no good reason. Yeah, so sorry, it ended up kind of dark, but yeah, we don't know much, and what we know is frightening.